If you have prostate cancer and your pathology report says Gleason 3 + 3 = 6, this video is for you. We're going to be talking about active surveillance, how to make sure that you have truly Gleason 6 prostate cancer, and kind of the ins and outs of the whole process. So today we're talking to Dr. Mark Schulz, who's a medical oncologist focusing solely on prostate cancer for over 30 years, and he's going to give us the details. So in today's video, Dr. Schulz, we're talking about Gleason 6 prostate cancer, so 3 + 3 = 6. A lot of people, find out they have prostate cancer and then their pathology report comes back, they're told they have Gleason 6, so they'd like to know what is it, and there is an industry standard of how Gleason 6 is being treated. We're starting to see a change with active surveillance, and we'll get into the details of this. But can you explain just primarily what Gleason 6 prostate cancer is?
You can't be labeled Gleason 6 unless you have a prostate biopsy. The biopsy needle goes into the prostate, into the tumor cells, and removes a piece of the prostate or a piece of the tumor, which is in the prostate. Those cells are sliced thinly, put on a glass slide, looked at under a microscope, and a pathologist, someone who's board certified and trained just to look at glass slides all day long, a pathologist will grade the cells into one of three categories. 1 and 2 disappeared many years ago. Grade 3, grade 4, or grade 5. And the beautiful thing about the Gleason grading system is that the appearance of the cells can be used to predict who's likely to harbor a type of cancer that can spread outside the prostate. The technical word is metastasize. Spreading through the edge of the prostate is a different proposition. Jumping to a lymph node, jumping to the bones, jumping to other parts of the body, that's called metastasis. And the Gleason system is the best way to predict if a tumor is likely to metastasize or not. Grade 3 is the type that simply doesn't metastasize. It's a harmless subtype of prostate cancer that does not spread outside the prostate. As a result, you mentioned people consider watching it rather than treating it.
So if it is a harmless form of prostate cancer that does not metastasize, why do we call it cancer?
Well, when it was named 50, 60 years ago, the physicians did not understand that it didn't metastasize. As we delve deeper into this prostate cancer realm, you'll find that people can have a mosaic of several different cancers in their prostate. They can have 3 and they can have 4, and this is signaled by the system where they'll say it's 3 + 4 is 7, or 4 + 3 is 7. The first number is the more common cancer that's seen under the microscope. 4 + 3 would mean that the doctor's seeing type 4 more than he's seeing type 3. Pure 3 + 3s are common in conjunction with other higher grade tumors, and there have been men who've had biopsies where they only picked up the 3 + 3, but later on they developed metastasis. The assumption was that the 3 + 3 had spread. More careful studies have been done now showing that when only 3 + 3 is present in the prostate, you can do this in men that have had a radical prostatectomy. They can slice the prostate and look through the whole prostate, every corner of the prostate. In men who have pure 3 + 3 and don't have anything else in their prostate, there's never been a recorded case of metastasis in those individuals. But this took careful studies that were done over years, and it was, I would say, about 15 years ago that it started to become apparent that 3 + 3 doesn't metastasize, but it was named cancer long before that.
3 quick things before I get to my next question. Number 1, we're having an in-person conference this September, and it's a great way for you to get your questions answered, meet other prostate cancer patients, and meet the physicians who are treating all of these patients. And it's a great way just to get personalized information. So you can find out more at pcri.org. Also, please subscribe to our YouTube channel because we come out with new prostate cancer videos every week. And if you would like to donate and join our cause, you can do so at pcri.org/donate. Now back to my conversation with Dr. Schulz. So speaking of studies, you wrote a book called The Key to Prostate Cancer, and it has multiple, experts, especially in different areas of prostate cancer. The expert in active surveillance is Dr. Lawrence Klotz from Canada, and he cited a, study from the American Journal of Surgical Pathology talking about that there's like 12,000 patients that they looked at where they had Gleason 6 prostate cancer and it never metastasized. So can you share a little more about that study? And I know it was done in 2012, but the thing is, I think patients need to realize that the relevance of that study has not changed, 12 years later in 2024.
Right, very important study. And there are other similar studies that have been published, but this is a very powerful statement about how confident we are that 3 plus 3 never metastasizes. So in this clinical trial, they looked at several different medical centers that were doing radical prostatectomies on men who have prostate cancer, and they took all the prostates that were pure 3 plus 3 on evaluation after the radical prostatectomy, and then they looked at the incidence of men who they found any cancer in the lymph nodes. That's the first jumping off spot for metastasis. They found actually something like 22 cases out of 12,000 radical prostatectomies that were thought to be pure 3 plus 3. They thought they found 22 men out of those 12,000 that did have spread to the lymph nodes. And they were saying, okay, spread initially was thought, well, it's rare, but possible. But then they went back and had a second look at the radical prostatectomy specimens. They were able to find the original glass slides in the radical prostatectomy specimens in like 19 of the 22 patients. In all 19, with further review of the radical prostatectomy specimens, they all had some higher grade cancer in another part of the prostate, or the 3 plus 3 was mislabeled. None of them were 3 plus 3. Of course, they had the other 11,080 or so patients that didn't have lymph node metastasis at the time of surgery. This is a huge number of patients, and to have, if it was only 20 patients, that would still be a very favorable statement about the incidence of spread, but there was never a single patient, not one in the 12,000 patients, that was demonstrated to have spread when there was pure 3 plus 3 in the prostate. I think it's good to just review briefly. Spread is something that occurs before the prostate is removed, not after. People think of having a radical prostatectomy and later cancer shows up, not thinking about the fact that for it to show up later, it must have already spread at the time of surgery. It was just too small to be detected. Maybe it wasn't in a lymph node that was removed, and over time, the metastatic lesion grows large enough to be detected. There's a time delay between the surgery and the appearance of the cancer coming back. But for the cancer to come back later, it had to have spread prior to the surgery, because once the primary tumor is removed, there's nothing more that could spread. And that's why this study is so powerful. So when they do 12,000 consecutive radical prostatectomies and find that none of the men that had 3 plus 3 was there any spread to any lymph nodes under any circumstances, the conclusion is irrefutable that 3 plus 3 doesn't spread.
Based off of what you're saying, though, I think a lot of people make the assumption that Gleason 3 plus 3 equals 6 can turn into a different type of cancer. And so what you're saying is that Gleason 6 does not turn into a 4 or a 5 later down the line, that there are other tumors that pop up in the prostate if that does happen. Am I correct?
Correct. It's theoretically possible that Gleason 3 plus 3 can degenerate into higher grade tumors, but it's very, very unlikely. What's far more likely is that the healthy prostate that hasn't been removed can develop a brand new cancer. Prostate cancers are common, and men can have more than one cancer, and this is part of the reason we have 3 plus 4, 4 plus 3, making allowance for the fact that there could be several cancers. Another example that seems to help people understand is that in men on active surveillance, we're oftentimes not watching them because we're worried about the 3 plus 3 turning into a problem. We're worried about the fact that a new cancer can come along. And the example that I cite is in the field of breast cancer, where women undergo successful surgery or radiation to, say, a tumor in their right breast, but they still need annual mammograms on their left breast because there's no promise that they won't get a new tumor in the left breast. And this is the process of active surveillance in men who have 3 plus 3. We're not concerned about the 3 plus 3. We're concerned about the fact that prostate cancer is common. And here's a man that's availed himself of the modern medical system, and how irresponsible it would be if we didn't watch that individual closely. And if they do develop a higher grade tumor in the future at some time, we want to catch it at an early and curable stage.
So, am I correct that 50% of all prostate cancer is Gleason 6 and does not need treatment?
Absolutely correct, yes. So 200,000 new cases of prostate cancer in the United States every year, and about 100,000 are Gleason 3 plus 3.
If a patient doesn't need treatment on Gleason 6, they really need to make sure that they are a true Gleason 6 patient. So what is the process to make sure? Are they getting a secondary biopsy? How do they know that this is truly Gleason 6 and I can move forward with that sense of safety?
Yeah, in the old days, the methodology was to get PSAs 2 to 4 times a year and to do repeat random biopsies on a periodic basis. So if you missed it on the first or second biopsy, maybe you'll catch it on the third or fourth biopsy, or if a new cancer shows up, you'll catch it with regular biopsies. I personally have abandoned random biopsies about 10 years ago when clinical trials showed that MRIs are more likely to see higher grade cancers than a biopsy is to pick them up. And we typically do targeted biopsies when MRIs suggest that there's a new spot or a lesion that could be a new higher grade cancer. 3T multiparametric MRI annually, checking PSA 2 or 3 times a year is our usual modus operandi for active surveillance.
Is it true that active surveillance patients, because of how they're being monitored, are less likely to die of prostate cancer because they're being watched so closely?
Right. They're less likely to die of prostate cancer than average guys in the general population who may not be getting screened. There's still a lot of men that don't do PSA screening. Practically no one in the general population gets regular MRI screening of their prostate. So it's not at all surprising that men who are on active surveillance have lower prostate cancer-specific mortality than the average American man who's maybe getting an annual physical, maybe not.
The process of a man going and having Gleason 6 and then, they find out, okay, I have this, but my doctor is still suggesting surgery, or I'm still being told maybe radiation is an option. What advice do you have for patients who are facing that and still being told that they need treatment even though they have Gleason 6 prostate cancer?
Doing active surveillance is not necessarily an attractive proposition, especially if the doctors are arguing for periodic, regular, random biopsies. But the alternative is even less attractive. Surgery and radiation can cause serious erectile dysfunction that doesn't respond to Viagra and Cialis. It's quite common if you say in a 65-year-old who has standard surgery or radiation, more than half of the men are going to be permanently sidelined and unable to get erections even with Cialis and Viagra. So that's a high price to pay for a harmless condition. Awareness of the harmlessness of the 3+3, the palatability of the modern monitoring, getting an MRI once a year isn't that heavy-handed, and then the seriousness of the implications of surgery and radiation, even in the finest hands. The industry, in my experience, when I hear patients talking about their visits to surgeons and radiation therapists, naturally these doctors tend to minimize, they don't talk a lot about the risk of impotence and incontinence. They're not trying to discourage these patients from having treatment. They're getting paid to do that type of treatment. I'm not trying to say they're disingenuous. They have arguments that run down the lines of saying, well, the random biopsy you have, 20% of the time it can miss something higher grade. So just to be safe, we should operate or we should radiate. I think the accurate comeback is that let's get a multiparametric MRI, let's do a staging PSMA PET scan, make sure we're not missing anything, and ensure that we really are on the right track with active surveillance. If there is something higher grade, we want to know about it and treat it. But the vast majority of men are going to have a localized, low-grade tumor that is not going to spread, and it hardly justifies such aggressive treatment.
So you've treated thousands of men with prostate cancer, and you have thousands of patients currently who are on active surveillance protocols. How long have you seen patients go on active surveillance? Is there an eventuality that they will eventually metastasize, or you've seen men their entire lives just stay on active surveillance and you monitor them and that's it?
Oh, it's quite common for men to not need further treatment. If that wasn't the case, I don't think active surveillance would be an attractive option. If you look back historically, because random biopsies were missing 20% of these higher grade tumors, you can understand why over the next 5 years or so, higher grade tumors were found with much greater frequency. These days, if men have a good quality MRI, you're not going to miss a substantial high-grade tumor. It'll be diagnosed and you will be, suggested to have treatment. But the men that are appropriately screened and don't have any higher grade tumors, in 10 years, I would say 10-15% of men go off active surveillance.
So a big question we get from active surveillance patients is sometimes they see their PSA kind of fluctuate over time. What would be a number or a marker that you would say, okay, well, we need to get a scan and check things further if their PSA does go up above a certain viewpoint?
Well, we're doing MRI scans routinely regardless of PSA, but I think you might be referring to PSMA PET scans. And the operative methodology is something called PSA density, which we've talked about in a different video. Men with bigger prostates normally have higher PSAs. Men with smaller prostates normally have lower PSAs. So there's an appropriate ratio between the amount of PSA and the size of the gland. And when that ratio is out of whack, we typically will get a PSMA PET scan to just double check that we're not missing something that hasn't been picked up with the previous MRIs.
So when it comes to Gleason 6 prostate cancer, how often are you seeing that the secondary pathology will come back at either a higher or a lower grade based off their viewpoint of seeing it a second time?
There's a tendency for inexperienced pathologists to grade higher to sort of protect themselves. No one's going to criticize you for calling something good a little more serious because at least you're probably going to end up treating that person. But they don't like to make errors the other direction. So if they have something that's moderately serious, they don't want to say it's less serious and then be responsible for someone not getting treatment when they should have had treatment. So what we found is that if you have pathology overreads done, that's the glass slides that were generated can be sent to a different pathologist at a reference center and reread to see if the original Gleason assignment is accurate. Maybe 10-20% of the time the grade changes, and I would say more often than not they actually get downgraded. So the men that I would have checked are not the ones who have already been graded as 3+3, but the ones that have been graded as 3+4 or 4+3, because I certainly have seen those be converted into 3+3 with a second read.
So with all the technologies that we have today, from monitoring PSA to getting these 3T MRIs and even having the active surveillance protocol, it's pretty common nowadays. We're seeing it across the US. Is there ever a reason where a Gleason 6 patient should get treatment and maybe a focal treatment just because maybe they don't want to, have prostate cancer in their mind, or is there any specific medical reason they would need it?
The answer is there's no specific medical reason that they would need it. When you get into the struggles that people have psychologically with having cancer in their body, I think that is really the responsibility of the treating physicians to educate people as to how this 3+3 entity has been misnamed. And if they were renaming it today, they wouldn't call it a cancer. They would call it a prostate growth or a benign tumor or something of that nature. So doing something to the prostate, even supposedly mild treatment to the prostate for something that really isn't broken doesn't make any sense to me. Anytime you embark upon a treatment, you risk unanticipated issues. So maybe most of the time people do well with a focal treatment, for example, which is less invasive than the more standard whole prostate treatments such as surgery and radiation. But there's always a possibility for complications anytime you walk through the front door of a hospital or a surgery center. So no, I don't think that we want to encourage people to have treatment for medical or for psychological reasons. I think that those issues can be dealt with appropriate education of patients as to what they're really dealing with.
A couple of key takeaways from my conversation with Dr. Schulz. One being that if your first pathology report comes back that you do have Gleason 6, as Dr. Schulz says, it's important to get a review of those slides and make sure that it is truly Gleason 6 prostate cancer before embarking upon active surveillance. Now, a lot of active surveillance patients come to me and say, I'm okay with being on active surveillance, but my family members are struggling with the idea that I have cancer and I'm not treating it. A great way to get support is through organizations and nonprofits who have support groups like Active Surveillance Patients International. Now, I'm going to link some, really great resources in the description below. So there's ASPI, which is Active Surveillance Patients International, and their website's aaspatients.org. They not only have webinars on diet, lifestyle, but also the ins and outs of how to talk to your family, what their monitoring process is like, and you can talk to other patients who are on active surveillance protocols. Another great resource is called the Active Surveiller. It's a blog written by a man named Howard Walensky. He's been on active surveillance for quite a long time, and he has tons of resources in that information. And there's other support groups you can join besides those two organizations, and I will link all that in the description because I think it's really helpful to get the support you need, not just from monitoring prostate cancer and the ins and outs of dealing with the medical system, but also dealing with your mental health, your emotional health, how you communicate this to your family, and how you should monitor it in the future. All of these resources are quite helpful, and another resource is our helpline at pcri.org/helpline. These are prostate cancer patients who have been trained by our medical oncology team. They give you information, not advice, but it's a great way just to get some questions answered on a case-by-case basis. All of this information is really being built up so that you can have a shared decision-making relationship with your medical teams. We want to make sure that your questions are being answered, you're advocating for yourself, and as your doctor's giving you more information, you really know that this information empowers me and I understand it and I'm sitting well with it and I know that I'm making educated decisions so that I have the best outcomes with my health. In active surveillance and in any type of prostate cancer, quality of life matters. And here at PCRI, we believe that you deserve that. I hope you know that you are important. You're not alone. Please reach out if you need help, and I hope you have a great week.